The soprano's note crossed the stadium, and my wineglass turned to sugar. Not a crack, a collapse. The stem stood there, holding nothing, while the bowl sifted down onto my console in a soft hiss of glass. I felt the pitch before the powder landed. It climbed up through the desk, into my wrists, into the fillings of my back teeth, that one mean frequency I'd hunted across mixing boards for 20 years. 412 hertz. My number. The glass knew it too, and went. Then the note found my chest. Something behind my ribs let go the same way the bowl had. Quiet. Total. No fight in it. The faders smeared. The house lights stretched into long gold ropes and pulled thin. No falling, no tunnel, just out. I woke on my back on a cold floor, stone under my shoulder blades, gray winter light coming down from a high slot of a window. A girl knelt over me, both hands on my arm, shaking it hard, her mouth working, open, shut, open, shaping something at me again and again. I heard none of it, not muffled, not ringing underwater, a silence with no floor to it. I slapped my own palm against my ear and felt the blow land in my hand and die there. Nothing crossed over. The world had gone dark in the one place I'd always lived. Panic came up my throat, fast and hot. My breath ran. My fingers dug at the cold stone for anything, any handhold. Then I saw it. Over the girl's lips, hanging in the chill air, a line of light. It rose and dipped as her mouth moved. A bright thread climbing, a quick tremor riding along the top of it, the whole living shape of her voice drawn out flat where my eyes could walk across it, pitch running up the vertical, phase shivering down its length, frame by frame. I knew that shape. I'd stared at it on screens half my life, chasing it, taming it, paying my rent with it. The girl saw my eyes lock on the air above her mouth and stopped shaking me. She drew back an inch. Her lips made a small, careful round, and the light spelled the fall of it for me. A slow, descending curve, soft on the end. Ren, she'd said. She was saying my name, this name, mine now. I lifted one hand between us and she said it again, slower, like coaxing a spooked colt, and the thread of light bent exactly the way her breath bent, and I read every degree of it without a single sound reaching me. My hands were already itching. 20 years of wanting to grab a tone and bend it, and here it was, naked, out in the open, waiting. The ears were gone. Fine. The sound had come back through my eyes, and this time I could see where every voice in the world was lying. Up, Marin signed, 2 fingers hooked under my elbow. She got me off the stone and steered me toward heat. A kitchen swung open around us. Low beams, a banked fire, frost feathering the one window where gray morning leaned in. 3 girls. The one who'd shaken me awake had a calm, steady face, and her hands moved slow and sure when she pointed me to a bench. Marin. The name arrived with the hands. Then the sharp one cut in. You fell again, the middle girl signed. Fast, flat, a flick off the chin. Done with it. Etta. Her fingers had opinions. She mimed my whole collapse back at me. The slump, the rolled eyes, cruel and exact, and a laugh kicked up in my chest before I decided to allow it. Marin swatted her hands down. Not now. The third one was barely a person yet. She came at my knee in a rush of wool socks and climbed it, and her small hand made a shape against my jaw. Flat palm, a tap, a tap. Pia. I felt the taps land in the bone. The voice I couldn't hear, arriving through skin. I read their 3 pairs of hands like 3 instruments in a mix. Over each set, faint in the cold air, that thread of light hung, pitch and tremor, the shape of what their throats did even when they only breathed. Pia's breath drew the cleanest line I'd ever seen. Dead true. No waver on it anywhere. The part of me that lived 20 years inside a console sat up hard. A door opened behind me. The light in the room changed before the man did. Tall, fur at the collar, a circlet gone dull. He looked at the loaf. He looked at the fire, the frost, the girls. His eyes crossed me the way they crossed the empty bench, a thing in the room, not a son. The prince, this body's stepfather. He signed nothing. He didn't know how. He took a heel of bread and left, and the cold he carried walked out with him. Etta's hands went still. Pia ducked her face into my sleeve. I sat there in a stranger's bones, stone deaf, owing this place nothing. Then Marin set a bowl in my hands, warm through the clay, straight into my palms. She didn't pity me. She fed me. Etta flicked a crumb at Pia. Pia shrieked a laugh I watched instead of heard, her light spiking gold and ragged, and the whole gray kitchen tipped toward these three like a room leaning into one bright window. I hadn't asked for them. I didn't get a say. The wanting came up anyway, the same heat as my hands itching for a tone, but bigger, with their faces in it. 3 pairs of hands. I'd keep every last one of them moving. Frost still crawled the one window when the brass came in. Not the man first, a breath of cold metal and incense, then the man wearing it, an order herald. Gray robe, a collar of dull discs, a staff he set once against the stone. I felt that. The floor carried it up through the bench into my tailbone, one clean knock. Marin went stiff beside me. Etta's quick hands dropped flat to the table. Pia's fingers, still curled in my sleeve, pulled small. The herald opened his mouth. I watched the light leave his lips before anything else could reach me. A thread, same as the girl's, but fat and bright and dead steady, climbing in a slow ramp and holding, held longer than any breath should hold. A wall of it laid flat across the room where my eyes could walk it. Then the room bent. Marin's spine folded at the waist. Down went her head. Etta, who'd mocked a prince with her chin an hour ago, dropped her face toward the boards like a string cut behind her neck. Pia slid off the bench and bowed, wool socks scuffing, her small true line guttering under his big one. Every back in the kitchen curved the same way, toward him. Mine didn't. I sat there. I felt the staff's knock fade out of the wood. His ramp of light rolled across the air and reached me, and passed. The phase shivered along its length, frame by frame, the way it always had on my screens, and it broke over my chest and kept right on going and took nothing with it. Nothing landed. The world's loudest order, and it died a hand from my skin. The herald's eyes found me. He was still singing, his light still poured, and he was staring at the one straight back in his bent room. His brow drew in, his hand lifted off the staff. He aimed his whole face at me, and the thread brightened, thickened, leaned. A second push stacked hard on the first, hard enough that Marin's bowed shoulders trembled under it. I felt that one in my teeth. A buzz in the jaw, faint, right where Pia's taps had landed. Still, my spine stayed mine. I wasn't brave, I just couldn't hear him. 20 years I'd chased a tone across a console and never once obeyed the waveform. I grabbed it, bent it, shoved it where I wanted it to sit. His blessing was a wall on a screen to me. Lines. I only ever read lines. The herald stopped. The bright ramp fell off his lips and the room came up slow. Marin's back unrolling, Etta lifting a stunned face, Pia clawing onto the bench. They blinked like sleepers surfacing. They didn't know they'd gone down. Not one of them knew their own necks had given. I knew. I'd watched the exact instant each one folded, and there it sat, plain as the frost feathering the glass. The thing that bowed every spine in this house couldn't reach mine. They heard it, so it owned them. I only got to watch it sweep past. And a thing you can see coming is a thing you can learn to break. A man who reads lines knows when to give nothing back. My face went flat before I chose it. The herald wasn't finished. He lifted the staff and set it down, and the knock climbed through the bench into my spine while the girls were still blinking themselves up right beside me. A second robe stood in the doorway behind him. Smaller, younger, a soft boy's face with old eyes. He held a slate and a nub of chalk. He wasn't singing. He was counting. The herald's mouth opened and the light climbed again, slow this time, shaped into little hooks instead of one flat wall. Words. I couldn't hear a single one. Under the table, Marin's hand found my knee, and her fingers spelled what fell off his lips, fast and trembling against my leg. 73 days, she spelled. The liturgy of submission. Then, every will in Ulnar bent to one note. The whole princedom humming the same low yes. His finger started around the room. Tribute. It stabbed the grain sacks, a number. The smoked fish on its hook, a number. It crossed to Marin and named a measure of cloth, swung to Etta and named more, and Etta's jaw set so hard I watched the cord jump in her throat. Then his finger found Pia. It stopped. She was still half under the bench, wool socks, thumb drifting toward her mouth. The herald held the point on her a beat too long. Behind him, the chalk scratched the slate. 3 quick strokes. The aide had marked my sister. My hands wanted to fly up. I pinned them under my thighs and kept the wall on my face. The aide lifted his eyes off Pia. They climbed the room slow, the bench, my sleeve, my chest, and landed on me. Not the way the prince looked through me, the other way, like a man rechecking a sum that wouldn't add. He leaned and said something into the herald's shoulder. The herald turned. 2 faces on me now, one old and one young, both still as the frost on the glass. The aide came around the table. He crouched to my level. Up close, his eyes went to my ear, then my throat, then back up, hunting for the door the voice should have walked through and hadn't. I gave him gray water, nothing moving under it. He smiled, small and patient. He set chalk to slate without looking down and drew one short stroke beside the others. Then he tapped his own ear, pointed at me, tapped it again. A question, slow, so I'd be sure to catch it. I let it die on the air I couldn't hear. 73 days to their liturgy. And before the herald's cold had even cleared the door, I was already a line on a stranger's slate. The back that didn't bow, written down to be looked at again. The chair leg came away from the frame with one twist, oak, split at the joint, the one that had wobbled under Etta all winter. I had it across my knees by the banked embers. Everyone was down. Pia slept against the wall in her wool socks, thumb loose at her mouth. Frost had crept back over the glass, and the only light left in the kitchen was the red breath under the ash. My borrowed hands knew the knife before I did. That was the strange part. I'd never carved a thing in my life. 20 years I shaped sound, not wood. But Wren's fingers found the grain and wrote it, peeling long, warm curls down into my lap. I wasn't whittling for kindling. I was chasing a shape I'd stared at on a screen 10,000 times. A horn. Wide mouth, narrow throat, a bend partway down. Not to throw a voice out, to swallow one and hand it back wrong. The knife bit. Shavings fell. I hollowed the bell, thinned the wall, set the bend where the wood wanted to lean. A hand landed on my shoulder. Etta. She crouched beside me, hair loose, eyes still puffed from the bowing she didn't know she'd done. Her fingers moved quick in the ember glow. Can't sleep. What is that? I held it up. A pipe. A nothing. She frowned. For Pia? I shook my head. Then I ran the only test I had. I tipped a pinch of flour dust onto the cold iron skillet and laid it flat between us. I pointed at her throat, then at the dust. Hum. Low. Hold it. She looked at me like I'd lost the last of my wits. Then she hummed. The dust woke. It jumped and crawled, little ridges marching across the iron. Her note, written in powder, the same lines I read off every mouth in this house. I raised the crude horn to my lips and pushed her note back through it. I couldn't hear a breath of it. Never would. I only felt it leave my chest and climb the oak, and I'd carved that throat to flip the wave, my crest dropping where her trough lived, her trough swallowing my crest, the two folding into each other and canceling. The dust stopped. Not scattered, not blown off. Stopped. Flat. Every ridge collapsing at once, like the skillet had forgotten it was being sung to. Etta's hum was still going. I watched her throat working, the cord jumping under her jaw. On the iron between us, nothing. Silence shaped. Silence I'd built with my own 2 hands out of a broken chair. I sat back and let my heart slam. All day their wall had folded every spine in here, and I'd only stood and watched it pass. Watching was all I'd had. Now there was this dead gray skillet, proof that their sound had an edge, and an edge is a thing a man can carve against. Etta quit humming. She stared at the still flower, then at me, then at the lumpy pipe in my fist. "What did you do?" her hands asked, slow. I grinned at her in the dark. I didn't have the signs yet to spell it. 73 days, and I just found the first note in Alnar they couldn't make me say. I pulled the horn against my chest and held on. The cartwheels cracked the ice in the yard, and I felt it climb my boots before I saw the gray robe. Same herald. The silent aide a step behind, slate already up in his hand. They'd come back for what they'd written down. Frost still furred the fence rail. The whole village stood out in it, breath smoking, sacks of grain and smoked fish and folded cloth heaped by the gate where the prince's men had stacked our measures the night before. Marin stood at my shoulder, Etta at my other side. Pia rode Marin's hip in her wool socks, thumb at her mouth, eyes huge at all the people. I had the horn inside my coat, mouth down, throat against my ribs, my hand wrapped around the bend. The herald raised his staff and brought it down on the frozen ground. Then he sang. I couldn't hear a note of it, I never would, but I saw it leave him, a wall of light tipping out over the crowd, the same peaks I'd read off every mouth in that kitchen, only stacked higher, rolling. Backs went down across the yard in a wave, knees buckled, the frost on the cart rail shivered itself into little marching ridges under the pressure. I read the wave's length the way I read dust on a skillet. I found the crest. I waited for it to reach the rail by my hand. Then I pushed my breath up the oak and handed it back, wrong. The frost ridges in front of me collapsed, flat, dead. 3 people beside me jerked upright, blinking, like a hand had let go of their necks. A hole opened in the wall of light, a torn patch, right where I stood. The herald's note stumbled. His head came around. The aide snapped faster, hunting the dead spot. My chest was already empty. 1 horn, 1 throat. The wall behind that torn patch still rolled over 100 bent backs, and the second my breath ran out, the light flooded the hole shut, and the whole yard sagged again. But the aide had already found what the dead patch left standing. Pia, upright on Marin's hip, the only small straight thing in a folded crowd, humming to herself, untouched, because she'd never bent to the voice in her life. The aide crossed the ice to her. He crouched. He touched Pia's jaw with 2 fingers, the way she'd touched mine that first night, and his mouth moved. Sing. She sang, 1 clear note up at him, pleased to be asked. I saw it leave her, a line so straight, so clean, no wobble down its whole length, the truest pitch I'd read off any mouth in this world. The aide went very still over it. He stood. He set chalk to slate, not a stroke this time. A circle, drawn slow, around the 3 he'd already made. Marin understood before I did. She twisted Pia away, both arms locked over the child's back. The aide didn't even look angry. He lifted 1 hand and 2 of the prince's own men stepped out of the crowd toward my sister. I tore the horn from my coat. I got it to my lips. I read the herald's wave, found a crest, threw my breath up the throat and folded it. The light tore again. The men closest staggered. Not the 2 on Marin, not the aide. Wrong patch. I'd only canceled the air in front of me, and they were 8 feet right of it, peeling Pia out of Marin's arms, while Marin's mouth came open in a scream I felt in the floor and couldn't hear. Etta hit the nearest man with both fists. He set her down in the frost without breaking stride. I pushed again, nothing left in my chest but a wheeze the oak couldn't shape. The wall sealed. Every back in the yard pressed lower. Mine stayed straight, and it bought Pia exactly nothing, because straightness was a thing for one body, and they were carrying her past me to the cart. She reached for me over the man's shoulder. Her hand made the sign we used for more, the only word she had for don't stop. The aide turned the slate so I could see the circle. Then he tapped his own ear, pointed at me. Same question as before, patient, like he already knew I'd carve all winter and it wouldn't matter. The cart took the ice hard going out. Pia's wool sock came off in the rut and lay there in the frost. I stood in the torn quiet I'd made, the horn dead in my fist, and watched them drive my littlest sister out the gate. The herald wasn't finished with us. He halted his men just inside the gate, turned in the cart, and lifted the staff again over the bowed yard. I braced for the wall. It didn't come. The light off his mouth spread slow and flat-topped this time. Not a song to break a back, a notice laid out for every soul to carry home. I couldn't hear one word of it. I never will. I read the shape of it leaving him and watched 100 heads stay down to take it. Marin's fingers moved against her thigh, low, feeding me what her ears caught. Omen, she spelled. Dissonance, heard in Ulnar. Dissonance. The torn patch, that dead flat hole I'd punched through his master's song not a minute ago, that was the omen they meant. I'd handed them their sign with my own breath. The aide climbed down off the cart. He recrossed the ice to me, unhurried, slate out, the circle already wiped clean. Fresh chalk now. He held the slate up to my face, the way you'd show a small child a picture. A number, drawn slow so my eyes could follow the stroke. Under it, the word his herald was still singing, and Marin caught up and pressed it into my open palm at the same beat. The liturgy of submission is moved. Calyx, first voice, has heard the dissonance. She will not wait on it. 73 days. That was the clock I'd been carving against, night after night, a chair leg at a time. The aide tapped the new number twice. 21. My breath went out of me. Not 21 more piled on. 21 total. 3 weeks to the morning they'd retune every will in Ulnar. My littlest sister's voice folded in with the rest. I felt it before I thought it. The herald's men shifting their weight, the cart rope creaking. The whole yard pressed a hair lower into the rut Pia had gone out through. I didn't break. I want you to know that. I stood in the frost, with her wool sock balled in one fist and the dead horn in the other, and something behind my ribs went quiet and hard and started counting. One throat wasn't enough. I'd proved that in front of everyone, so I needed throats. I needed 12 mouths and 12 horns aimed at the crests I'd been missing. A wall to answer their wall. The aide watched my face for the crack and didn't get one. Something moved behind his eyes. He flipped the slate, wrote one more line, and this time he didn't turn it to the yard. He turned it to me alone. Marin read it first. Her hand clamped white over the sock in mine. The first voice asks after the silence in your house. She means to come and hear it herself. He pocketed the chalk and climbed up beside the herald. The voice sang them through the gate, every back bending lower as they passed, and I stood straight in the middle of all that bending, 21 days in my chest, already pulling their whole song apart with my hands. You picked the wrong door, boy. Bram didn't look up from his mold. The foundry sat at the village edge, and I'd walked there with Marin that same afternoon, the cart rut still fresh behind us, Pia's sock balled in my coat. Heat rolled off the furnace and shook the floor through my boots. I read that tremble before I read his face. He'd been in the yard at dawn, standing, half up anyway, a back that didn't know which way to fold. Marin's hands moved. She told him what I was. Deaf. Bram tapped his own ear and grinned with no teeth on one side. Me too, near enough. 40 years of bronze. The order's pretty noise goes in one bad ear and dies there. That was why the wall hadn't taken him. I set the dead horn on his bench. I flattened his thick hand against the cooling bell beside it and struck the rim with a hammer. The bronze sang. He felt the buzz climb into his palm the same way I did, a man feeling the thing he'd shaped his whole life and never once heard clean. I struck a second note against the first. The two fought in his hand. The buzz thinned, soured, half died between them. His grin went out. What'd you do to it? Marin spelled it slow. 2 sounds. One eats the other. His eyes came up to mine. You can do that? To the voice? I nodded. The door scraped. A woman stepped in out of the cold, frost still on her shawl, her jaw set like she'd been holding something behind her teeth for years. Leora sings for them, Bram said, up at the chancel. Watch her. I sing the binding. Her mouth shaped each word so I'd catch the light off it. Every liturgy. I've laid the chain on 40 necks with my own throat. The Cooper's girl. The miller. Her fingers wouldn't hold still against her skirt. This morning they took a child out the north gate, and I stood in the loft and tuned the rope that pulled her. Pia. My fist closed on the wool in my coat. I read the words off her lips. I believed her shaking hands more. I didn't waste breath swearing I was harmless. I picked up the horn and I showed her. Blew the antiphase against Bram's struck bell, watched the note crumple in the air between us, watched her face open like a man had just told her water ran uphill. "That's a hole," she whispered. "In the song. You put a hole in it." One hole. Marin passed my hands to them both. Not one throat. 12. 12 mouths and 12 horns, aimed where the song crests. I struck the bell once more so they'd feel where I meant. A wall to stand against their wall. Bram looked at his furnace, at the heat he already owned. "Bronze throats," he said slowly, turning the dead oak horn in his scarred fingers. "I can pour throats." "Better than that stick." Leora wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I know every crest, where the breath peaks, where the gap sits. I can teach your 12 to put their hole exactly there." Her voice dropped, her mouth barely moved. "Calyx tunes the chancel herself. She's coming early. 3 weeks." 21 days, I said. My own voice came out wrong, and I let it. Bram crossed to the door and threw the bolt. Leora banked the furnace higher with both hands. By firelight, the three of us started counting throats. Bram kicked a length of bronze pipe across the floor. It rang off my boot, and I felt the note die in the dirt before it reached my knee. "Cut for a gutter," he signed. Now it was a second mouth. I picked it up. Cold, heavy, a good wide throat. I set it on the bench beside the oak horn and looked at Leora across the firelight. "Sing me one," I said. "A real one. The thing you lay on necks." Her hands went still. "You don't aim that at a person in this room. At the air. Just the air. Let me see it." She didn't want to. I watched her decide. The chords stand up in her throat, the breath bank low. Her eyes flicked to the bolted door. Then she sang, "I'll never hear it." It came off her throat as light instead. A clean, cruel line. And I knew that line. I'd seen its twin drag Pia out the north gate this morning while I stood useless in the frost. Marin flinched. Bram caught it through his good half and grimaced at the floor. I read the crest. Where it peaked, where it sat, where the hook waited at the end. My hands already knew the shape of the answer. "Blow when I drop my hand," I told Marin, and pushed the pipe into her grip. "Hard. Don't quit till I close my fist." I took the oak horn. I aimed it into the light still hanging in the room. Leora sang the command again, louder, the binding climbing toward its hook. I dropped my hand. 2 horns, mine and Marin's, 2 notes thrown straight down the throat of hers. The light buckled. Right in the middle of the phrase, a hole tore open, a pocket where her command should have lived and didn't. I watched the binding run into that dead air and come out the far side as nothing at all. Leora's mouth kept moving. Then it stopped. She pressed 2 fingers to her own lips like she didn't trust them anymore. "It's gone." Her hand was shaking. Mid-word, I felt it leave my own throat and die. "Again," I said. We threw it again. Same 2 notes, same dead pocket. The command falling into the same patch of silence and never climbing out. Twice running, the hole sat in the exact same place in the air. Not luck, a cell. 2 mouths I could build 100 times over. Bram barked a laugh I felt more than saw, his whole chest rocking the bench under my palms. He slapped the pipe. "Throats," he said. "I'll pour you 11 more by week's end. Better than gutter scrap." I should have felt 10 feet tall. I felt the sock in my coat instead. I turned to Leora. "Where do they keep her?" She wiped her hands down her skirt and didn't pretend not to know who I meant. "Beneath the chancel. There's an undercroft. They hold the pitched ones down there. The perfect ears. Till the liturgy." Her jaw worked. "Yours is in it. Behind a door I've stood outside of with my hand on the latch. Held how? Chains? Not with chains." She looked at the 2 horns, then back at me. "With a note. Every pitched throat has one, the single tone it can't fight, the one the binding ties itself to. Lay that note on a child and she can't raise a hand against it. It's how we keep them quiet on the cart. Pia's, I said. You know hers. She nodded, slow. I tuned the rope to it this morning. Sing it. Her face begged me not to make her. Mine didn't move. She drew a thin breath and let the smallest thread of it off her lips. Then I saw it, the cleanest line I'd ever read. The one Pia drew the first day on the floor of the hall. The one so straight and bright I swore over it I'd keep her. Her own perfect pitch, bent back into the leash around her neck. They owned my sister with the best thing in her. By the third night, Bram's first throats had cooled enough to carry. No snow yet, but the cold had teeth, and the gutters wore a skin of black ice that drank the torchlight and gave none of it back. Maren and I came in through the tanner's gate, the bronze mouths wrapped in sacking on a hand barrow she pushed and I steadied. I'd never crossed Alnar without my ears. Tonight, I didn't need them. The chancel bell tolled the hour, and I felt the whole town pass it along, cobbles handing the tremble up through my soles, walls flinging it corner to corner, every lane funneling it downhill toward the cathedral's open mouth. Sound runs downhill. It pools. It pooled in the low places. The well court. The Fishwives Square. The dip where 3 streets braided into one below the chancel steps. That's where their liturgy would stack on itself and roar loudest. That's where a hole would gut it. Mark these, I signed, and Maren scratched a notch into the barrow rail at each. We set the first throat in the well court, mouth up, wedged behind the horse trough where no glance would catch it. I packed dirt round the base so it sat true. Boots. A lantern swung into the lane. We folded down behind the trough. 2 of the prince's watchmen passed close enough that I felt their tread climb my knees. Slow, bored, then gone uphill. I breathed again. Then the wall told me something worse. A new tremble came down the stone. Not boots. A man walking soft, palm flat to the house fronts, stopping every few steps. I lifted my head a finger's width. Gray robe, hood back, chin tilted like he was tasting the air. A listener, out hunting the wrong note in his city. He stopped at the mouth of the well court, his hand spread on the cornerstone, and off his lips came a low thread of light, a probe, sweeping the dark for anything that didn't ring true. I was the one thing that never rang. The silence in a house. My own quiet would stand up in his net like a hole punched in a sheet. His head turned toward the trough. Maren saw it land. She didn't freeze. She started to hum, low, ragged, a drunk's tuneless dribble, and let it wobble out from behind the stone so his probe had something ordinary to bite. The light bent toward her voice, found a sot sleeping it off, lost its hunger. He held one more breath. Then his palm came off the stone, and he drifted on downhill, soft as falling ash. I let my chest empty slow. We worked the rest low and quiet. A throat down a dead drain pipe in the Fishwives Square. One under a baker's loose step in the braided dip. Each one I set where the stone crowded the most sound, where their own voices would press in thickest and beg to be torn. The rest I left as notches on the rail, nodes waiting for the throats still cooling on Bram's sand. It came clear to me whole then. Not one horn in one room anymore. Mouths salted through the low bones of the town, asleep until I woke them. No 2 in the same square. Let them search. Raid the well court, the dip still bites. Pry up the baker's step, the drain pipe still waits its turn. You can't arrest a city's whole throat. Maren tapped my arm and pointed uphill, where the chancel hunched black against the cloud, and somewhere under its feet, the undercroft, and Pia leashed inside it. I notched the rail one last time and started for the steps. Morning over the market came gray and stiff, frost furring the awning ropes, every breath standing white above the stalls. Edda pushed the bread cart, loaves stacked brown and steaming, and under the false floor, wrapped in flour sacking, 3 of Bram's throats rode hidden. Maren walked the other side with a basket on her hip. I worked a stall down, reading faces I couldn't hear. Here's what the 3 knights had taught me. Bowed people read flat. Their voices lay down in straight gray lines, every kink sung out of them. But not all were fully tuned. Some still flickered. The cooper at the barrel stall flickered. I bought a hoop of cheese I didn't want. His hands shook, setting it in my palm. Not cold, not age. His boy had gone north on a cart last spring. I signed, slow, the little sign Maren had drilled into me. He went still. Then his chin dropped, once. Maren drifted past and left a loaf on his counter. He drew it under the cloth without a word, and the throat baked inside it went with him into the dark of his shop. One mouth planted, one more back that might not bend. We worked the row that way. A fishwife with raw knuckles, a girl minding the chandler's table. Each took bread, each took the thing hidden under it. Each gave me that small, bare nod that meant the leash had a fray in it somewhere. Then the air changed. I felt it through the cobbles first, boots, heavy, in step, and the crowd folding back off them. An order overseer, gray sash, a ledger, 2 house guards trailing him down the bread row, lifting cloths, thumbing loaves. Edda's hands tightened on the cart rail. He came on slow. A loaf here, turned and dropped. A basket there, cloth flicked back. Closer. Steady, Maren signed, low against her hip. He reached the cart. His hand went down into the loaves, knuckles deep. I watched his fingers spread, hunting the floor under the bread, and my whole chest drew tight as a string winding up to snap. One of the trailing guards stepped in fast, the broad one, the one I'd pressed 3 coins on at the gate. "Overseer, this cart's checked." "Mine, sir." He laid a flat hand over the loaves. "It's the wife's bread. I'd know the smell of it blind." The overseer's fingers stopped. 1 breath. 2. He drew his hand back out, dusted the flour from it, and moved on. Edda didn't breathe until he'd cleared 3 stalls. Then the overseer stopped, turned half round. His eyes came back down the row, past the fishwife, past the cooper's emptied counter, and settled on our cart 1 beat too long. The gray robe came down the bread row before the overseer had even cleared the square. A listener, Calix's own. I knew him by how the crowd didn't fold for him. They leaned in, hungry to be heard. He walked with his eyes shut, lips parted, a thread of sound running steady out of him. The same low note held and held while his head swung slow side to side, fishing the street for the place where that note hit a wall and came back wrong. My silence was that wall. Maren felt me stiffen. "He's reading for holes," she signed against her basket. "Walk. Don't go quiet." I couldn't. I had no voice to flood the gap with. My quiet stood up in his net the second he swept past. I watched his held note bend toward me, the light of it kinking. His eyes opened, found my back, so I gave him what he wanted. I let him have the hole and started to walk it, off the bread row, down toward the fishwives' square, where a throat sat sleeping in a dead drain pipe. He came. Of course he came. A man who hunts silence can't leave the loudest silence in the street. I led him slow. A turn at the cooper's, a turn past the salt stall, his reference tone humming closer at my back the whole way down, patient, certain. The square opened, frost on the cobbles, fish guts frozen in the gutter, the drain pipe mouth black under the wall. I crossed the dip first, then I stopped, turned, and let him close the gap. He stepped onto the stone over the pipe. I worked my heel against the loose cobble, the trick Maren and I had set, and the throat under it woke. Here's what a tuned man never plans for. His whole craft rides on one note he trusts past his own hands. He holds it steady. He measures the world against it. The throat took that note, folded it back inverted, and swallowed it whole. His tone went out like a snuffed wick. I saw it die in the light, the steady thread snapping to nothing, no echo, no return. the world gone flat and dumb around his open mouth. His hand shot to his ear. He sang louder. I watched the light pour off his teeth and vanish a foot from his face, eaten before it could carry. He couldn't hear his own throat, couldn't hear the gutter, the market, his own boots. The dead patch had him by the head. He spun, grabbed the wall. His mouth made a shape. My name, a curse. I couldn't tell, and neither could he. A listener with nothing to listen to is just a blind man in a frozen square. He staggered toward the edge of the dip, clutching stone, knees gone soft. The second he crossed back into live air, his held note must have slammed home, because he flinched like a slap had landed and dropped to one knee in the fish slime. People stared. The hunter, reeling, deaf in the open street, one hand pressed to his skull. Marin reached the square mouth, basket on her hip, and gave me the smallest nod. I didn't run. I walked out past him, close enough to read the panic still kinking the light off his lips, and I left him in the gutter, teaching himself how to hear again. Let Calix send the next one. The square would eat his note too. They say the order can't hear him. A fishwife breathed it to the woman beside her, both of them slitting herring without looking down, and the words went up the square like spilled oil finding every crack. I kept walking. Behind me, the listener still knelt in the gutter, one hand clamped to his skull. The whisper moved faster than my boots. I read it in the light off their mouths, the same shade passing barrel to barrel, palm to cupped ear. Silent one, silent one. A boy on a salt crate mouthed it to his brother and pointed at my back. Marin fell in at my shoulder. Don't smile, she signed against the basket. They're watching you now too. She was right. God help me, I wanted to grin like a fool. Then the gray sash cut the square in half. The overseer was back, ledger under one arm, his two house guards shoving the fish stalls wide. He climbed onto the crate the boy had scrambled off, and the whole market stilled under him. He didn't sing. He didn't need to. He had paper, and he had men. By order of the Cantor Calix, his guard bawled it for him, voice flat and ugly. The square is sealed. No cart leaves it. No throat stays quiet. My chest dropped through the frost. The guard read off the ledger next, finger dragging the line. A weight of silver, for word of a silent one who walked the low streets and struck a listener deaf. Calix had already named the wound and priced the man who made it. I hadn't given anyone a name. They were minting me one in the open air, and the crowd drank it down. I watched the want of it ripple through every leaning face, half terror, half hunger. Second sweep, the guard called. Every soul, you bow, you sing the submission line. Here, now. The cantor wants to hear who can't. There it was. The overseer swung his ledger and pointed, straight at the drainpipe wall, where the kneeling listener still hugged the stone, right over the sleeping throat. He didn't know what slept there. He just liked the spot a broken man had chosen. If they sang the line across that dead patch, the throat would swallow somebody's note whole, mine, or the fishwife's, 3 stalls down, her hidden bronze under the counter and her raw knuckles gone bloodless on the wood. Begin, the overseer said. The guards started pulling people forward by the collar, one row at a time, toward the dead air. Marin's hand closed on my sleeve, hard. The overseer's eyes climbed the stalls, hunting, and they came down the row toward our cart, toward Etta, toward the false floor, toward the price now stamped on my silence, and settled there, and stayed. The summons cut in before the first caller got dragged forward. A man in the prince's green shoved through the herring reek, set one flat hand on the overseer's ledger, and said a thing I read clean off his lips. The prince wants his stepson, now. The overseer's jaw rocked. Gray sash, green livery, he stood down. You don't sing a prince's blood into the gutter in front of the prince's own man. Not for silver, not in the open. I went. Marin's eyes chased me to the square mouth, asking. I had nothing to hand her. They walked me up through the keep, past dead hearths, into the room where my stepfather kept his maps. Gray morning leaned through one tall window. He stood in it with his back to me, a big man gone quiet at the shoulders, and for one breath I just watched the light refuse to move off him. He'd never once looked at me. months under his roof, and I'd been a chair that ate bread. He turned. He looked now. A wave of his hand, and the guard backed out. He shut the door himself, threw the bolt, slow. Then he didn't speak. He crossed to the table and laid a scrap of vellum flat under my eyes. The low streets, drawn in his own hand, the well court behind the horse trough, the baker's step, the fishwives' square, marked with one small hard cross right over where the throat slept. My gut went cold, then hot. He'd seen all of it. The man who never lifted his eyes off his ledgers had been tracing my nights street by street. I braced for the guards, for the word that ends you. It never came. His hand moved instead, clumsy, rusted, but shaped. The sign for C, the sign for you. The same crude signs his daughters threw across the supper table, the ones he'd never bothered to learn. He'd learned them. For this. Then he worked fast. He pushed a purse across the wood, heavy and dull, the coin packed in wool so it made no chime a listener could catch. He set a second scrap beside the map, the bribed house guard's name, and under it 3 more, men of his own, freed to my use. He pressed his signet into a blot of warm wax and slid the writ beneath my thumb without a sound. Shadow and coin, both across one table in dead silence. Last, he set down a small thing, and his hand shook doing it. A child's bone whistle, the kind you carve to keep a toddler busy. Pia's. He didn't sign her name. He didn't have to. His thumb stayed on it a moment too long, and when it lifted, the whistle stayed, on my side of the table. I understood him whole then. A prince who marched would be heard, weighed, and broken long before the liturgy. But a stepson nobody ever counted could move under the floor of the whole city. He pointed at the door. Go, quiet. I picked up the purse. I closed my fist around the whistle till the carved ridges bit the meat of my palm. He'd handed me the city shadow to work in and spent not one word a listener could steal. I bowed, the first true one I'd ever given him. Then I turned for the stairs, a prince at my back and 18 days left on the clock, and went down to break my sisters out of that sealed square. The bronze guttermouth sat clamped in a leather chest harness on Bram's bench, still warm from the morning's pour, and I set the prince's wool-packed purse down beside it without a sound. Bram looked at the purse, then at me. His hands asked the only question that mattered. Whose? I signed back the shape for crown, then for the low streets, and his grin cracked wide enough to show the gap where a kiln spit took a tooth last winter. We had no time to toast a prince. I lifted the guttermouth and held it flat against my ribs. The fixed throats slept in the dirt. They ate one note, one spot, forever. A thing buried can't walk a child out of a locked house though, so I needed this one to ride. A hole in the wall of sound that moved when my feet moved. Leora leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me lash bronze to my chest like I'd lost my wits. You'll choke yourself, she said. Sing me something, low, a command like you'd leash a child. Her mouth went flat. She hated the word. But she filled her chest and rolled one note across the floor, and on the bench, the iron filings shivered into a long, bright comb, a ridge of light marching at me over the wood. I stepped into it. The ridge folded. Right at the bronze mouth, the comb collapsed, swallowed whole. But 2 strides past me, the light stood back up and kept coming. The pocket sat on my chest and nowhere else. Not enough. A hole that small only saves my own skin. It had to reach ahead of me, into the air a child stands in. I twisted the mouth on its harness, tipping the board down and outward, away from my body. Again, she sang. The note came. The dead patch slid off my breastbone and pooled in front of my boots, and where it pooled, the filings lay down and would not get up. Walk with me, I signed to Bram, and started across the floor. The pocket walked too. Leora held her note and chased it with her eyes, and I watched her voice die a full stride before it touched me, the bright comb breaking on empty air the whole length of the bench. She pushed harder. The light climbed, fattened, and dropped into the gap the same as the quiet ones did. She stopped, pressed 2 fingers to her own throat. "I can't hear where it goes," she said, and the words came out smaller than she meant them. "It doesn't go anywhere. That's the whole trick." Bram grabbed my sleeve. His hands flew, too long. It speaks back, he was right. Held against my chest more than a breath, the bronze hummed a thin tone of its own, a whine I couldn't hear but the iron dust could, a tremor that would light a listener's score like a torch carried into a cellar. So we packed the boar with felted wool, the same stuff that hushed the prince's coin, wad after wad, until the wine flattened off the dust and the mouth drank sound without singing any back. I crossed the floor a 3rd time. Leora threw commands at my spine, at my flanks, sharp little leash tones built to stop a body cold, and every one of them lay down a step short of my heels. By the 10th, she'd fallen quiet on her own, just watching the filings drop. "That," she said at last, "is exactly how they hold the choir house. A hall of them, one cantor's voice owning every child at once." I knew. I cinched the final strap until the bronze rode snug as a breastplate over my heart, and the cold of it bled straight through my shirt. A horn that walked, a moving corridor of nothing. The key, cut clean and hanging on my chest. What I didn't have was the count of doors between Pia's leash tone and the night air, or how many notes the wool would swallow before the bronze, packed too tight and pushed too hard, started to sing on its own. The candle flames all leaned the same way when the cantor sang, every wick bowing toward her like grass flattened under a boot. I came in through the low door behind her lectern. 2 rows of children knelt on the cold flagstones, chins up, eyes front, not one of them moving a hair. Pia knelt 3rd from the end. I knew her by the thumb. She still gnawed her sleeve cuff raw when nobody fed her on time, and the scab on that knuckle hadn't closed since autumn. Her face was wrong now, slack, a doll left sitting where it fell. The cantor rolled a note down the rows. I couldn't hear it, but I watched it land, every small spine straightened in one wave, heads tipping back another inch, and the dust on the flags jumped into ridges that all pointed at her mouth. A leash, sung wide. She held the whole hall on a single breath. I started walking. The bronze rode cold over my heart, boar tipped down and out, and the pocket of nothing spilled ahead of my boots across the stone. Where it went, the dust lay down. I watched her note break on its edge, the ridges marching at me, then collapsing a full stride short, swallowed, gone. She felt the gap before she saw it. Her chin came around, the note climbed, fattened. I caught it in the flames doubling their bow, and dropped into the dead air the same as a whisper. I reached Pia. The corridor folded over her, almost. Her near shoulder slid into the dead air and woke. Her far knee stayed locked to the cantor's note, snagged at the pocket's edge, and for one breath she hung between us, half girl and half doll, her weight pulling 2 directions at once. I shifted my chest, tipped the bronze a finger wider. The edge swept past her hip, and the rest of her came loose altogether, shoulders dropping, jaw going soft, eyes finding mine with a child's whole startled weight behind them. Her mouth made my name. I felt the shape of it under my palm when I cupped her cheek. No sound I could keep, just the warm push of breath. I signed quiet, then behind me, and put her at my spine. The cantor's hand slammed the lectern. I didn't hear the crack, but the flames shuddered with it. She drew a breath that hollowed her cheeks and threw a command straight down the aisle, a stop note, the kind that locks a body cold, and it died at the lip of my pocket and never reached a soul standing inside it. 3 more knelt between me and the door. I walked them one at a time. The pocket washed over the first boy, and his held breath let go in a rush I felt against my own neck. The second flinched like a sleeper catching himself mid-fall and grabbed my belt without being told. The third, a small girl with a shaved head and a brass tag wired through her collar, only blinked twice and started to cry without any sound, and I gathered the whole stumbling string of them toward the night door while the cantor's voice climbed and climbed behind us and bought her nothing. She stopped singing. I read it in the flames first. They stood straight up, every one, no boot left to bend them. I turned my head. She'd come down off the lectern into the aisle, both hands open at her sides, not reaching for a bell pull, not shouting the door guards awake, just staring at the strip of floor where her voice kept dying. Her lips moved slow, once, shaping a question to the empty air between us. Then her eyes came off the dust and fixed on me. I got the children over the threshold into the cold, the brass tag girl's tears still warm on my forearm. Behind us, through the open door, I watched the cantor lift one flat hand above her head and hold it there, a signal, not a note. And high in the dark above the choir house roof, a great bell took its first slow swing, the deep one, the bell they only ever ring for a single woman in all of Alnar. The herald hit the fountain steps at a run and snapped a parchment open above his head. I stood at the mouth of an alley with 4 children pressed to my legs, the brass tag girl's fist twisted into my coat. Snow had started. It came down slow and sat where it fell, and across the square, every lit window threw a square of yellow onto it. I couldn't hear the man bawling from the fountain. Didn't need to. His mouth was wide and slow, made for the back rows, and I'd read worse mouths in worse light than this. By order of the cantor, his lips chopped each word. A thief came in silence. He broke the holy song. He took 4 of the chosen, and he looked the cantor in her face. The crowd's heads all swung to the fountain together, and snow slid off 100 shoulders at once. So she'd told them, not guards, not a quiet hunt, but my own story handed to the whole city before I'd cleared the square. Then the herald's arm dropped, and every kneeler around him pitched forward at the waist in one slow wave that rolled out from the cathedral and pressed the falling snow into ridges, every ridge pointing back at the great black doors. She was singing again, wide, over the rooftops, over all of us. The kids started to go. Pia's knees softened against my shin. The sleeper boy's grip on my belt slid loose, finger by finger. I dragged the bronze around on its cord till the boar faced the square, and the dead air spilled out and caught them. Pia's spine snapping straight, the boy's hand clamping down again. That was the trouble. Look at the square now. A whole kneeling city, heads to the stone, and one black hole in it where 5 people stood upright. A hole cut exactly to my shape. High in the cathedral, in the open gallery arch, a gray shape came to the rail. She didn't look at the herald. She didn't look down at the kneelers either. Her head turned slow across the square, over the bowed ranks, reading the dark the way I read dust, hunting the one place her voice dropped into nothing and died. Her chin stopped. Square on my alley, dead on the hole. Not me, the gap. The single spot in all Alnar her song couldn't fill. And now she knew it was a thing, a man, a mind she couldn't reach. And she wanted it. Down at the doors, the gray robes moved fast. 2 of them hauled a boy up the steps by his arms, fine coat, a thin gold band knocked crooked on his head, heels dragging furrows through the clean snow. The prince. He got a foot under him. They kicked it out from under and took him up into the black mouth of the cathedral. The doors swung shut. Both leaves slammed in hard. The boom came up through my boot soles a breath after I saw the dust jump, and behind them the long bars dropped into their brackets one after another and shivered the whole front of the building down into the ground. The herald turned to my alley. Parchment forgotten now, he shaped it plain and slow, so even a deaf man across a frozen square couldn't lose a word. The cantor holds the prince. The doors are barred. She will sing the children of Alnar to stone, every last one, and she will lift her song off a single child for any soul who carries her the silent thief's name. 1,000 faces, snow on every lash, swung round to follow his pointing arm, straight at the hole where I stood with 4 stolen children and no voice in my throat to give her. Up in the gallery she lifted one hand, not to strike, not to wave a guard forward, She laid it flat over her own heart, a promise made to me and no one else, and then she drew the long breath that would put the next child down. The prince was hers behind those bars. The 2 rows I'd left kneeling were hers. The only soul in all of Alnar who could sell her my name sat in the crook of my arm with her gnawed thumb in her mouth. Pia's heel knocked my collarbone with every step. Her thumb stayed jammed in her mouth, and the snow caught in her cropped hair was melting cold down the back of my neck. We were 3 lanes back from the square. The torchlight behind us had burned down to a low orange smear, and even the deep bell had finally stopped its slow swinging. She weighed almost nothing up there, and that lightness sat wrong in my arms. I'd left the other 3 at the dyer's gate 2 streets back. The brass tag girl wouldn't let go of my coat until the dyer's wife peeled her fingers off one at a time. Then a bolt slid home behind them. 3 of the 4 were under a roof with a wall around them, and the last one rode my shoulders, and her I was taking the whole way home. Our door sat at the dead end of Tanner's Row, paint weathered gray. I didn't knock. I leaned my shoulder where the wood always stuck and felt the jam give, except that shutter wasn't the door. It was feet hitting the boards inside, coming fast. Sarah had felt the latch. She reached us before the door swung wide. My eldest sister, flower to the elbow, her mouth stretched on a word I would never hear. Pia left my shoulders like a grain sack lifted clean off. Bet crowded in behind with the little one's blanket, and then all 3 of my sisters were one knot down on the floorboards, and the wood drummed their stamping and their laughing straight up into my knees, the only road sound ever takes to reach me anymore. I stood in the doorway and let it come up my legs. By the hearth, my stepmother had the chalk still in her hand. The doorpost beside her was scored white with little strokes, 1 cut for every day since the Cantor's wagons first rolled down our street, and she'd been adding them in the dark with no lamp lit. She never had much use for me. She looked at Pia now, then at me, and her chin started going and wouldn't quit, and she set the chalk down on the sill without scratching one more line. We ate late and crammed. Bread, the hard yellow cheese, a pot with 3 carrots fighting in it, 4 of us at a table built for 2. Pia wouldn't pull her thumb out long enough to chew, so Sarah fed her by hand, crust by crust, the way you feed a bird that's forgotten it owns a beak. The fire threw its heat across one side of my face. Their laughing came up the table legs into my wrists where I'd laid them flat on the wood, and for the length of 1 bowl of stew, I let every bit of it in, all of them, breathing, under the one roof I'd torn the night apart to fill. Then Pia tugged my sleeve and pointed past me at the window. Snow stuck to the glass. Beyond it ran the empty lane, and past the lane, that orange smear still burned where the square was, where 1,000 mouths now had my shape by heart, and 1 price hung over it. A child lifted off the song for a name. The only tongue in all of Alnar that carried my name sat on the bench at my hip with cheese on her chin, swinging her feet under the table. I set my hand on the back of her neck, light. She didn't flinch. Across the table, Sarah had stopped laughing. Her eyes went to the bronze where it hung cold on its cord by the door, then to the scored doorpost, then to me, and she lifted one hand and signed it slow. "They know your face now?" I didn't answer quick enough. A coal split in the grate and jumped the whole floor, and every head in the room turned toward the snap of it but mine. Out past the walls of that warm little room, my horns stood waiting in their hidden lofts, and under their loose roof tiles, every one of them set by my own hands, every one dead quiet. None of them knew the hunt had a face now. The men who climbed up nightly to tend them didn't know it either, that the thing the whole city was turning over stones to find sat fed and warm at his sister's table, while out in the falling snow, a gloved hand was already closing on the first of them. A sledge swung up into the lamplight and came down on the loft tiles, and the cobbles carried the crack of it up through my boots before I'd even rounded the corner. I went still against the wall. Snow sifted off the eave over my head. Down the lane, 4 of them in gray were stripping the roof off Maddox's store loft, tile by tile, and a 5th man stood dead center with a little iron fork in his fist. I'd come out to walk the grid before bed, same as any night. That fork stopped me cold. He tapped it on the stone and watched the gutter dust. And when the ring of it died too quick, swallowed flat into nothing, he lifted one finger and the sledge followed where it pointed. That was how they were finding them, not by ear, the way I'd lain awake fearing, but by the hole my horns punched clean through the city's noise. Every dead pocket read like a black mouth on their map. The gray man read each one off the cobbles like a written word. The sledge went through the tile, then through the bronze underneath. I felt it give. That soft, final shudder of a thing of mine going to scrap climbed the wall at my shoulder and set my back teeth humming. I'd set that horn myself 2 winters back, flat on my belly in the rafters with my lamp shuttered. Down the row, 3 more roofs already gaped open to the snow. Then they brought Bram out. 2 of them dragged him through the store door by the arms, and his bad leg plowed a long black smear through the clean snow behind him. Irons on his wrists already. Bram, who climbed for me every night with a tallow lamp clamped in his teeth and never once asked what the cold brass was for. The gray man crouched to his level and said something short. I caught half of it off his lips. Whose hands set these? Bram shook his head. He hit Bram across the mouth with the fork. Bram's head snapped sideways, he spat a dark string into the snow, and he shook his head again, slower this time, but he shook it. My foot came off the wall. One step, the lamplight had me to the knee before I caught the cornerstone and hauled myself back into the dark. Because the moment they had my face, they had Pia. They had the table built for 2 and the cheese on her chin. So I stood there and let them take my man. They turned him toward the square. The gray man folded the fork away into his coat and threw one more thing over his shoulder, half of which I stole off his moving mouth before the doors open, before the singing. A sledge swung one last time behind them, another horn went soft and dead under it, and the shudder reached me late and small up the cold wall, like the last twitch of something already gone. I counted the roofs still standing and came up short, nowhere near enough. A third of my grid lay open to the snow. My best climber was walking to the canter in irons. He'd shaken his head twice now, twice. But no man shakes it forever, and the only word they wanted pried out of him was the one that ended at my sister's table. Wet plaster slapped the shutter as a gray robe pressed a fresh notice flat against Maddox's store and walked off without smoothing the curling corner. People gathered at it fast. I didn't read the page. I read them. The way one woman's shoulders dropped and a man pulled the cap off his head and crushed it in both fists. The baker beside him turned and ran. His mouth shaped one word twice as he went. Tonight. Tonight. Days. I'd scored every day of it on my own doorpost in chalk, 1 stroke a night since her wagons first rolled into the square. The chalk was a lie now. Lamplight swung into the lane mouth. 2 grays came first, then a third with a hooded lantern lifted high, sweeping the snow for boot prints, and mine were all over it. I went off the main run, into the gap between the Coopers and the dye house, back flat to the cold stone. I made myself go slow. The cobbles told me they were coming before any light did, that fine grain of tramping climbing up through stone into the soles of my feet. I slid 3 doors down to the dyer's overhang. I'd set a horn there myself last spring, and I stepped into its pocket. Dust lay flat as a poured floor under the eave. Inside it, sound went to nothing. The grays came level with me, lanterns up, and a man not 4 feet off opened his mouth wide and bawled something the dead air swallowed whole. He couldn't hear his own voice die. He moved on. Then the tapping started. Down at the lane man with the iron fork crouched and set its tines to the stone. I felt no ring of it. What I felt was the gutter dust answer, jumping in a tight, bright line that pointed away from him and straight up the lane toward me. He read the cobbles the way I read flame. Every dead pocket I'd ever set lay on his map like a black word, and he was walking the whole sentence of them right at my chest. The very thing hiding me was the thing he hunted. I broke cover before his finger could lift. Out of the pocket, across the open white, boots loud now to ears I couldn't borrow, into the next dead zone under the chandler's split gutter, one of two I had left on this row, and I'd just spent the other. Behind me, the fork tapped, paused, tapped, and the dust line swung after me each time. He never ran. He didn't need to. He walked his fork from pocket to pocket and let the map do the chasing, while I spent my own hidden places one by one to stay a single street ahead of a man who never broke stride. Home lay the other way. My own door, the table built for two, Pia asleep with cheese still drying on her chin, and every step carried me further from it. The ground itself dropped a note. A shudder came up through the cobbles, slow and enormous, lower than anything I'd felt all winter. The deep bell, silent since the night it rang for her, swinging again in its tower. It climbed my shin bones. Every gray head in the lane turned to the cathedral at once, lanterns wheeling, and the fork man rose out of his crouch and slid his tines away into his coat. He didn't need the map anymore. The bell was the summons. The doors were opening, and they were opening now. 4 streets off, in the wrong dead pocket, my prints bleeding black across the snow behind me. And behind those opening doors stood Bram in irons, with the one word in his mouth that ended at my sister's table. The second stroke of the bell came down through the stone before the first had finished leaving my teeth. I turned off the lane I'd been running. I pointed myself at the one door in Alnar I'd sworn I'd never walk through twice. The great bell swung slow in the open tower, high over 2 rows of children kneeling up the cathedral steps. I came out of the last lane low and stopped against the almshouse wall. A gray robe stood not 6 feet off, his back to me. A lantern hung on a pole above the bowed heads. I went still. Then the bell came down again. Not a sound. I'll never have one of those again. A pressure. It rolled off the bronze, down through the tower, into the steps and the cold wall at my spine, and the whole mountain of cut stone drank that pressure and handed it straight back to me through my palm. The buttress hummed. The flagstones buzzed up into my boots. The cathedral wasn't carrying her note. It was answering with one of its own. Through the open doors, the candlelight stood gold and steady, and her voice must have climbed, because every small back on those steps straightened in one wave, chins lifting together like wheat under a gust. I felt it twice. Once from her mouth, once a half-beat later, bounced down off the high vault and back up through the floor into the children's knees. The room was singing her louder than she could sing herself. 2 winters I'd fought her a mouth at a time. One horn, one pocket of dead air dragged along at my heels, a man dipping a flood out with a thimble. The order had cut my answer in granite 200 years before I ever woke in this stepson's bones. A box the size of a hill, every rib of it tuned, built to ring. Then the swing settled into one steady beat, and that beat climbed my shin bones and lodged in the old break of this jaw, and I knew it the way you know a voice through a wall. I'd died on that pitch once, a test room on the far side of everything, one tone thrown back and back off bare walls till the glass crept off the bench and my heart stopped between 2 beats. 412. Here it was again, swinging out of their holy bell, and the bronze had no more notion than the priest did what it was good for. My hand lay flat on the stone, and the whole shape of the thing cracked open behind my eyes. I'd been killing sound. Standing in the river with my cup, bailing, every night, alone. Sound you can swallow, though. Sound you can also pour. Feed the box what it already wants. Set my horns to push the ring instead of nulling it. Drive the beat instead of drinking it. And this pile of stone stops being her throne. It turns into the loudest throat in Alnar, and the hand on its windpipe would be mine. Across the steps, Bram knelt in his irons between 2 grays. He lifted his head slow, the way a man counts the boots he knows he can't outrun, and he found me there against the wall. His chin twitched, just once. Then he dropped his eyes hard and turned his face down into the snow, giving them nothing, giving me the dark one more time, and the sight of it shut my throat like a fist. I knew now what I could make this place do. I knew, too, what it would cost. Every horn I had left hung in the right ribs of the right walls. Hands I didn't have to hang them. Away up to that swinging bell before her next breath came down. The gray robe 6 feet off shifted his weight and began to turn his head toward the wall, lantern light sliding along the stone toward my boots, empty pockets at my belt, my best climber in irons on the steps, a cathedral standing there cocked and waiting to be played, and not one soul left in this whole frozen square to play it at my side. A hand closed on my wrist out of the dark behind me, and I had the elbow cocked to break a jaw before the smell of woad off those fingers stopped it cold. The dyer's wife. She didn't let go. Behind her, where the almshouse shadow had stood empty a breath before, the dark was packed with shoulders. 10, a dozen, more, breathing low against the cold stone. Sarah stood at the front of them. Bet pressed in at her shoulder, white to the lips, a sack hugged to her chest that clinked when she shifted. Pia told us where you'd go. Sarah's mouth shaped it close to my cheek so I could read the words off her breath. She tipped the sack. Inside, bronze. My horns, every one still hanging in the lanes, torn down off the grid and carried here on the backs of people I'd never once let myself ask. 2 men I didn't know slid up out of the crowd. Plain coats, soft boots, hands that knew where they were going. One touched 2 fingers to his brow, quick, the way a soldier salutes a thing he's already decided to follow. The princes then slipped their watch to come stand in the snow with a deaf man and a dye-stained mob. No time to weep about it. The lantern gray was finishing his turn. I went for him first. 3 steps and I had an arm across his windpipe, dragging him backward off his heels, hauling him down into the dead patch that rode at my boots. His mouth tore open to shout the square awake. Nothing left it. The dead air ate the cry whole, swallowed it before it cleared his teeth, and I laid him down in the snow with the lantern still burning over a man who'd made no sound at all. The shadow men were already past me. They took the 2 grays flanking Bram low and fast. An arm, a knee, a hand clamped over each mouth, and the larger gray got a blade half drawn before a tanner I knew by his apron clubbed his wrist with a fuller's bat, and the knife dropped quiet into a drift. Up on the steps, her voice came down. I felt it bend the candle flames in the doorway, felt the kneeling children straighten in that one ugly wave, and a gray near the top lifted his head, scenting wrong, scanning down the rows toward the dark at the wall. Now, I mouthed, and dragged the pocket over Bram. The farrier was already on his knees at the irons with a cold chisel set to the rivet and a stub hammer cocked. He looked at me. I nodded him into the dead air. The hammer fell, and I watched the dust on the steps stay flat. No ridge, no jump. The clang that should have snapped every head in the square, dying the instant it was born. He struck again. The dust didn't so much as shiver. 3rd blow, and the rivet sheared, and the iron cuff fell open into the snow without a whisper to mark it. Bram came off his knees. He swayed, caught my forearm and lifted his face, and the dark he'd been handing me all night, the dropped eyes, the turned cheek, all of it was gone. He grinned at me with a split lip. "Thought you'd run home," he breathed. "Climb's still yours," I told his mouth, and pressed the first horn out of Bet's sack into his torn hands. Up the south buttress, the bell loft, before her next big breath comes down. I turned and started carving them out into the dark by feel. The dyer's wife and 2 horns to the north transept where the wall ran thinnest. Sarah and the tanner along the inner rib by the door, low, behind the candle shadow. The prince's men up the choir stair on Bram's heels. I set a horn in every fist I had, and pointed each fist at the spot in that great tuned hill where it would do the most harm, and not one of them flinched from me. 12 hands, 12 horns, a way up to the bell, and a climber loose on the stone to take it. I'd come into this square with empty pockets and not a soul to stand with me. Now the whole dark wall behind the almshouse was mine, breathing, waiting on my hand to drop. Bram was already 6 feet up the buttress, the bronze tucked in his shirt, snow sifting off the ledge under his boot. Somewhere back in the lanes, faint through the flagstones, a hard tooth of iron scraped cobble. Once, then closer. The order's fork out hunting for the dead patches we'd left bleeding all the way to this wall. And her breath was filling for the next note. The fork came round the buttress first, a gray robe at a dead sprint, both fists on the iron, the prongs already swinging for the spot where the dyer's wife had wedged her 2 horns. I'd spent every night of this stolen life killing sound, swallowing it, pressing it flat into the dust. Not tonight. Tonight, I wanted the whole tuned hill to roar on my count, and that wanting walked me straight at him. He reached the first horn before I reached him. The fork's tooth caught the bell of it and ripped it out of the chink in the mortar, and I felt the loss come up through the soles of my boots, a node gone dark, the stone above it going slack and dumb. The dyer's wife cried something I couldn't hear. I caught her wrist, pushed the spare from Bet's sack into her palm, and pointed 2 feet left where a hairline crack climbed the rib. "There," I mouthed, "where it itches under your thumb." She said it. The tooth had torn one hole. I'd opened another a foot higher, deeper in the grain where his fork would never bite. And that was the thing I hadn't let myself believe till now. He could pull a horn out of the wall, but he could not pull the wall. I went down the granite by feel, palm flat, reading. The cathedral talked back through my hand, a long shiver here where the rib ran thin, a dead place there where 2 courses had set wrong 100 winters back. Every spot that trembled was a spot that wanted to sing. I planted a horn on each one. Sarah held the inner rib by the door. I turned her bronze a quarter so its mouth pointed not out at the square, but up into the throat of the arch. The tanner took the next. On the choir stair the prince's men climbed steady, Bram's boots scuffing somewhere above them in the dark. A second gray came off the steps with that new tilt to his head, listening for the patch of nothing my horns left in the air, hunting the dead spots like a hound on a cold trail. He found Sarah's horn by the hush around it. He reached. The tanner's fuller's bat took him across the forearm. The fork rang off the flagstone, and Sarah had the horn jammed back in its crack before the man hit the snow. Up top, her voice came down again, bending every flame in the doorway toward her steps. I watched the candlelight lean. I watched the dust on the lintel jump into a ridge and aim itself at her, 100 iron filings snapping to a lodestone. Then I did the thing I'd come here to learn how to do, the thing no horn of mine had managed in all those nights I spent murdering every sound I made. I dropped my hand. Down the wall, 12 fists turned 12 bores the quarter turn I'd shown them, not killing her note now, feeding on it, catching the great hill's own ring and pouring it back out through the bronze. I felt it before I'd believe it. The shiver in the rib doubled under my palm. The dust on the lintel stuttered, broke its ridge, and a fresh ridge formed crossways, pointing not up at her steps, but down the wall at us. The flames in the doorway quit leaning toward her. A listener at the head of the stair felt it too. He spun, fork high, mouth working, scanning for the canceller, for the deaf thief who eats sound. And there was no pocket of nothing left to find, because I wasn't eating now. I was pouring. He had no tooth for that. He lunged for the choir stair horn anyway, past the defected guard who grabbed his robe and missed. His fingers closed on the bronze. The gap tore open in the grid like a yanked tooth, 11, and the cross ridge in the dust wavered and thinned. The guard got a second hand in the man's collar and ripped him off. The tanner slammed the horn home, 12 again, and the ridge went hard and bright as a blade. Now the fork lay loose on the flagstone, and another gray had it, and a third was coming down the steps, 3 at a stride, and the whole gray tide had finally turned its back on the kneeling children to claw at my wall instead. 12 horns locked into the bones of the cathedral, a climber almost at the bell. And on the steps above us all, the cantor lifted both arms wide, and behind her, the order opened their throats as one, drawing the breath for the chord that empties a town. Calix's mouth dropped open above us, and every candle in the doorway flattened to a thin blue line. Behind her, the order's throats opened too. I couldn't hear the cord building, I never can, but I felt the whole hill draw its breath down through my boots, the air going tight against my teeth, the loose snow lifting off the step in a fine sheet that hung there, undecided which way to fall. Then it came down. The cord went through the cathedral like a boot through river ice. Under my palm, the rib bucked hard enough to skin my knuckles. Every node I'd planted shrieked up into my hand at once, 12 points of stone trying to lie down and do what she said, the dust on the lintel snapping back into her ridge and aiming itself up the steps at the rows of kneeling children whose heads were already tipping back toward the song that wanted to scoop them hollow. This was the note that emptied towns. I'd met its little brother once, on a Tuesday, and it had killed me. I pressed my flat hand to the granite and held. Down the wall, the dyer's wife caught my eye and jammed her bronze tight in the crack. Sarah set her shoulder against the inner rib. 12 fists held 12 horns dead still against the stone, and the grid did the one thing I'd built it for. It caught her cord at the crest and threw it back the other way up. I felt the two waves meet in my wrist before my head caught what it meant. The rib that had been bucking under the canter went quiet, not slack, quiet. Her song climbing one way, my horns pouring the exact opposite back into it. Crest dropped into trough, and where the two crossed, the stone simply stopped having any opinion at all. The dust on the lintel froze in the air. Her ridge shivered down its whole length, split, and dropped flat. 100 iron filings letting go of the lodestone in a single breath. The flames stood straight up off their wicks like nothing was pulling at them anymore. A gray at the foot of the choir stair clapped both hands over his ears. He didn't do that against Loud. He did it against the whole, against the place where 100 years of his order's voice had always pushed back at the world. Gone now, flattened to nothing under 12 bored horns. I'll tell you what no sound is, from inside a deaf man's skin. It's the floor of a quarry at dawn. The whole shaking town under my soles went level and true, Pia's chalk, and the bell, and my ruined ears all standing in one held breath. And for that breath, I owned the hill. Calix felt it first of all of them. Her hand chopped sideways and cut the order off mid-phrase. Their mouths shut as one, and the flames wobbled, and the ordinary night came rushing back, snow finishing its slow fall onto the step. She came down 2 stairs. Her eyes hunted the wall, found my flat hand pinned to the granite, and her lips made a shape I didn't need ears to read. Louder, she told them. The throats opened wider than before. I felt the new cord stack up under the old one, fatter, reaching past the pitch my horns were turned to catch. A wall of it built to overrun my 12 by sheer mass, and I rolled my hand a half-inch on the stone and met it there too. The dyer's wife turned her bore. Sarah turned hers. The cross ridge held. Calix sang her highest note, the one that had rung the great bell and put a square on its knees, the one that buys children by the wagon load. And it walked down off the steps, hit my flat grid, and died in the 6 feet of air between her teeth and my palm with nowhere left to stand. Her chest heaved for the next breath. None came worth the having. The order's mouths were wide and working, and the candle flames never bent, and the snow kept falling straight. And for the first time in 100 years, the singing order of Alnar stood on its own steps and made no sound at all. I felt her see it. Both arms still flung wide, the prince a gray shadow held at her hip, her whole liturgy pouring out and flattening to nothing on my wall, and her hands began to shake. But quiet was never what I came up this hill to make. All that ring I'd been catching had to go somewhere, and it was pooling now in the bones under my hand, gathering, heavy as floodwater behind a door. Above me in the open tower, Bram's fist closed on the bell rope. The whole tuned weight of 200 years sat loose and humming in my palm, with only one road left to climb. Bram threw his whole weight off the tower ledge, and the bell rope took it. I felt the great bell lean in my palm before it ever moved. 200 years of loose, humming bronze tipping off its dead center, and the flood I'd been hoarding in the ribs all night found the one road still open and started the climb the tower bone toward the lip of it. The rope hauled. The yoke groaned down through the stone into my wrist. Up there in the cold, the bell began its slow first swing, fat and full and stupid with weight. Calyx saw the rope move. She flung the prince off her hip into a gray's arms and came down the steps 3 at a time, both hands thrown out, her mouth already opening for the note that would catch that bell and hold it the way she'd held a whole square on its knees. I knew the shape of it now. I'd been eating it for an hour. "Hold the line," I said, to nobody in this town who could hear me, to 12 fists I had not once stopped trusting. The dyer's wife drove her bronze deeper into the crack. Sarah leaned her shoulder until her boots skidded on the snow. Calyx sang, high, climbing the tower after the bell to stop its tongue, and I rolled my hand a finger's width on the granite and shoved everything up the rope to meet her there. All of it, every drop of pooled ring, all her own cord I'd been catching and folding back on her, I drove straight up the spine of the tower and poured it into the bell at the one pitch the thing was born to ring. Its own. 412. The note I'd choked on at a mixing desk on a Tuesday with a town's name in my mouth. The note that stopped my heart and dropped me into this deaf boy's skin. I gave it back. I fed her bell its own voice until the bronze had no choice but to answer. The hum changed under my hand. Round went to hard. The great smooth tone I'd read all night sharpened to a buzz that climbed and found nowhere wider to go. The metal singing past the place metal is allowed to sing, every grain of it grinding on the next. Calyx's note cracked first. Her voice split on the high step. She spun and grabbed a gray by the collar and threw him at the wall. "Break it! Smash one! Any!" The tanner caught the man's fork on his good forearm and the horn stayed home. She turned for another. There was no time left to turn. The bell tore. I felt it go up my whole arm, not a toll, a seam. 200 years of bronze opening along its lip in one cold line, the swing coming apart in the air, the yoke jolting slack as the rope went weightless in Bram's fists above me. The hum in my palm stopped being one thing. It was halves. It was pieces. It was a sound I would never hear and did not need. The order's whole instrument splitting open like a struck egg over its own steps, raining dust and flaked paint down the tower face. Every candle in the doorway snuffing flat at once. Calyx stood with both arms still raised to a bell that wasn't there. The granite under my hand went dead. No pitch, no push, no floor of voice to stand a song on. The cathedral that had held one note for 200 years had nothing left to give back, and her mouth kept working on the high step and made the same nothing my ruined ears had always made. She looked at her own hands. Out past the broken doors, the snow kept coming down soft and uncaring on the rooftops. And the thing I'd dammed up in those ribs all night, all that caught and folded ring, let go of the hill and ran loose into the dark of the town, house to house, toward every door with a child kneeling behind it. I felt it leave. I couldn't follow where it went. Whose feet, out there in the cold, would be the first to stand? A boy on the 7th step pushed himself up off the stone. Just the one. A thin kid in a nightshirt, knees cracking, head wobbling, who'd knelt there frozen since the first toll. He stood. Nobody sang him back down. His weight came off the step into my palm, not as a pitch, the granite had no voice left to give, but as a shudder, real and rough. Boots finding stone where a held body used to be. Then the girl beside him, then the whole row. 2 lines of children climbing up off the cathedral steps through the dust and the falling paint, and the tremor of all those small feet rolled up my wrist in a stutter I could never have caught with living ears. I read it with my hand. I read 100 wills snapping their leash at once. Calyx spun on them. She came down 2 steps and flung both hands at the rising children, her throat working, her jaw driving the shape of the note that had pinned a whole square. Kneel, down, kneel. Her mouth made shapes and pushed no sound into the world, no floor under it, no stone to carry it. The children kept standing. She grabbed a gray by the arm and shoved him forward. Put them down. The word landed flat in the dead air and died where it fell. The gray took 3 steps toward a row of waking children, looked at their faces, and stopped where he was. Out by the broken doors, the prince got his feet under him. A gray still had him by the collar, the one she'd thrown him to, holding the boy off the cobbles like a grain sack. The prince planted one boot, then the other. He rose up out of that fist, slow, and turned his chin and looked at Calix the way you look at a dog on a chain too short to reach you. She pointed at him. Her mouth shaped, "Get him down." And the gray waited for the note that would fold the boy's knees. And the note never came, because there was nothing left on this hill to carry her voice anywhere. The prince knelt to no song. He shook the collar loose and stepped clear. At the wall, Sarah came off her braced shoulder and stood straight. Bet let go of the crack she'd been holding and wiped her bronze on her skirt, both of them upright in the snow with their chins up, while the woman who'd marched her wagons down our street stood on her own dead steps and could not bend one child. I'd kept a count since the night they took Pia. 73 nights chalked on our doorpost when it started, the line of marks shrinking down toward a morning I never wanted to walk into. That count hit 0 right there on the steps. For once, it hit 0 because I said so. Calix looked at the gray who wouldn't move. She looked at the prince walking off free. She turned a slow circle on the high step with both arms half lifted, hunting a wall, a flame, a single kneeling child, anything left in this town that still answered her mouth. Nothing answered. The square came awake around her in pieces, mothers swaying up off the cobbles, a baker's man catching his daughter under the arms before she pitched over. A whole hill of people lifting their heads into the snow and finding their own knees again, finding they could choose where to set them down, and not one of them, yet, looking at the woman who'd put them there. They started to look up instead, up the tower face, where Bram hung off a slack rope grinning through the grit, down at the dead gray stone, across at the dye-stained line of my family, bracing a cracked rib of the cathedral with their bare hands. 100 faces turning in the dark, hunting the thing that had torn the bell open over their roofs, wanting a hand to grip, a name to hang on this enormous quiet. I stood there with my palm flat on a stone that would never sing again, and I had no name yet to give them. The prince crossed the square toward me through the falling snow and the drift of pale paint, and the crowd peeled open a lane to let him come. His collar hung torn where the gray had gripped it. He stopped an arm's length off. Up close, he was younger than his bounty made him sound. A boy with a split lip and a hard jaw, chest still heaving. He looked at the bronze horn warm in my fist, then up at the cracked bell hanging dead over both our heads. His mouth moved. You tore it. Not a question, a thing he already knew. I read it clean off his lips and gave him the only answer my throat had. I nodded, once. He held my eyes a long beat, and whatever he'd come across the snow to settle, he settled it there, looking at a deaf stepson in a borrowed coat with a dead instrument at his back. He turned to the square, threw one arm back at me, and said something to all of them. I felt the push of it before I read a word, the shove of his voice rolling down through the cobbles into my boots, big and shapeless, a wave with no pitch left in the world to carry it. The faces nearest him caught it first. Mouths opened. The same figure passed back up the hill, mother to baker's man to child, a word handed hand to hand through the dark, and I couldn't hear a single round of it. So I read it the only way left to me. Off 200 jaws snapping the same shape. Off the dust shivering on the dead step in a stutter that repeated under all those stamping feet, the same figure again and again until I had the front of it, silent. That one I knew by the lips alone. The back of it I got from Sarah. She reached me before Bet did, shoved through the last of the lane and got both her dye-stained hands flat on my jaw, the way she used to in the black of our loft so I could read her when no candle burned. She turned my face to hers. She mouthed it slow, big, twice over. Silent. Conductor. Then she watched me catch it, and her cracked lip pulled sideways, and she nodded like she'd known the word would fit me before the prince ever found it. Conductor. The cathedral had conducted this town for 200 years. Every kneel, every bowed flame, a hill of people moved on a string of sound they never chose. I'd cut the string. The silence where the song used to live, the dead air I carried in bronze, the thing that had no voice and bent no child, they'd taken that and made it a man, and made the man their own. Bet got under my other arm. Bram came down the slack rope grinning through the grit and dropped into the snow beside us. Up on her own ruined steps, Calix stood alone, both hands fallen now, watching the square she'd ordered to name a silent thief hand that name to me instead, not as a thief, but as the thing that stood between them and the next voice that came singing down their street. I climbed the first dead step and turned around. 100 faces tipped up to follow me, snow catching in their hair, breath smoking, every chin lifted clear of the kneel for good. I couldn't say a word they'd hear, I never would. So I lifted the horn instead, raised the cracked bronze high where the whole hill could see it, and in the same stroke, the torn bell hung above me, the great split mouth that rang at the one pitch I died on, the note with a town's name in it, the morning my ears quit forever. The thing that killed me, hanging over my head like it had been forged to crown exactly this. I held the bronze up until the last of them had seen it, then brought it down slow, the way you ease a fader to silence at the close of a long night's work, and the square stood and breathed and did not kneel. 73 nights I'd chalked toward a morning I dreaded. Sarah's hands were still warm on my jaw. Pia slept 3 streets over, with her own knees under her own blanket, and no wagon would come for her again. The snow kept falling on a town that had its keeper now, on the broken bell that named me, and on the granite under my boots that would never sing one more soul down as long as I stood on it.